Great.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Camille Nylan, the teacher for our 4-week dance class series. Every week it's on a different beat. You don't need any dance experience. You're just going to have fun and get your groove on. Every Thursday starting July 10th through July 31st, 6:30 to 7:30 at the New Orleans Healing Center on St. Claude. Come on in, have fun, and get your groove on. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you.
Greetings, greetings, and salutations. Honor and respect, honor and respect, honor and respect. It is another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. Voodoo Hoodoo 101. Sponsored by, promoted by NOIVD, New Orleans International Voodoo Day. We continue to invite you to join us, support us, become a part of our team for our third annual International New Orleans Voodoo Day. We want you to become a part of something extraordinary. New Orleans International Voodoo Day is not just an event, it is a movement that celebrates culture, fosters education, and connects people from around the globe. By sponsoring this event, you're supporting a tax-deductible cause that preserves heritage, uplifts art and education, and fosters healing within the community. Your sponsorship goes beyond promoting your business. It demonstrates your commitment to cultural preservation and education while supporting a unique event that brings international recognition to New Orleans. Events like symposiums, art exhibitions, sacred processions, and global speakers offer unparalleled opportunities to honor history and inspire a brighter future. Supporting an event like this means empowering a community, enriching cultural understanding, and making a meaningful impact on the world. It connects your brand to a celebration that values unity, diversity, and progress while helping preserve traditions for generations to come. So join us in creating a legacy. Explore our sponsorship tiers and help us make New Orleans International Voodoo Day an unforgettable celebration. Together, we can uplift our community and inspire the world. Visit us at www.voodooday.org. Again, www.voodooday.org. All is a blessing, and we look forward to seeing you there. We want to pick up our conversation this evening by localizing it just a little bit. We have shared the Jamaican maroon story because it is the most well documented as it relates to maroon colonies and their activities, but also to show a brighter and broader picture of what we were experiencing here in Louisiana in the New Orleans area. I'm going to start by first quoting an excerpt from the Dirge of St. Milo, Louisiana folk song as recorded by George Washington Cable in Creole Slave Songs, the Century Magazine, April 1886. Before those grand cabildo men, they charged that he had made a plot to cut the throats of all the whites. They asked him who his comrades were. Poor St. Milo said not a word. The judge his sentence read to him, and then they raised the gallows tree. They drew the horse, the cart moved off, and left St. Milo hanging there from a tree. From 1780 to 1784, St. Milo became the Spanish colony's most notorious maroon or cimarron after establishing a territory for fugitive slaves at Ville Gallarde in present-day St. Bernard Parish. His territory stretched from the Rigolets in present-day New Orleans east to Lake Bourne, along the canals and bayous connecting Lake Pontchartrain the Gulf of Mexico, and the Mississippi River. This area encompasses the present site of Bayou Sauvage National Wildlife Reserve. One of St. Milo's main encampments was located a short distance away from Chef Mentor Pass, a narrow waterway that connects Lake Bourne to Lake Pontchartrain. In defense of his territory, St. Milo reportedly issued the warning, "Woe betide the white man who crosses these bounds." When several white Americans attempted to capture him and fellow Maroons to return them to slavery in 1783, St. Milo killed one man and rescued his compatriots. St. Milo later confessed his role in killing 4 white Englishmen and commandeering their provisions. After several raids on his encampment by colonial authorities, St. Milo was eventually captured, tortured, and sentenced to a public death and hanging in Plaza de Armas, which we know today as Jackson Square, on June 19th, 1784. Maroon settlements like the one established by St. Milo developed throughout the New World, where African runaways tried to recreate the language, religion, and cultural traditions they were severed from by slavery. Many of the Maroon communities developed in colonial Louisiana. Beginning in 1720s, Africans fleeing slavery developed an extensive network of settlements on the outskirts of New Orleans. In Louisiana, Maroonage was initially a temporary break for enslaved Africans and Indians, who often ran away together to escape neglect and abuse by slave owners. By the 1740s, the system had developed into a well-established, sophisticated form of resistance to slavery and the plantation economy. Enslaved men and women and children in pursuit of freedom risked recapture, risked brutal punishment and death at the hands of slave owners and government agents, whether escaping for a short duration or for an extended period. Maroons created alternative communities that existed between slavery and freedom. Navigating the wetlands posed real dangers. The presence of alligators and poisonous snakes, fluctuating water levels, and a treacherous natural landscape deterred potential inhabitants. This proved to be an advantage for Maroons, who created a mutually sustaining community beyond the supervision of plantation owners and the colonial government. St. Milo and other Maroons learned to navigate the narrow, intricate networks of waterways, using them as escape routes and secret passages to other Maroon villages. They adapted to the natural environment by planting, harvesting, fishing, and hunting in the abundant habitat. Maroons' family members and friends in New Orleans or on nearby plantations helped them to pirate and trade food, ammunition, and supplies. They also provided valuable intelligence that aided the Maroons in defending their settlements. Many whites turned a blind eye to the Maroon colonies to advance their own economic interest. They traded with Maroons, purchased their wares, and hired them to work in nearby sawmills. Maroons shared their earnings equally among their fellow fugitives in direct challenge to the slave economy that exploited their labor for the financial benefit of a white minority. And because of their small numbers, whites could not contain the system of Maroonage. For the most part, they accepted it as an inconvenient reality. This reality made it easier for Maroons like St. Milo to move between plantation, marshland, and city without arousing suspicion. These fluid communities developed in tandem with New Orleans Afro-Creole culture. And so the telling and retelling of Nanny of the Maroons and Kwaku and the various wars and slave uprisings that they participated in had a direct and profound effect on how we lived and were treated here in New Orleans. When driving outside of New Orleans, we probably don't pay much attention to the bodies of water that were that we're driving over or the swamps that the interstates and bridges now cut through. But prior to colonization, New Orleans and the colony of Louisiana consisted primarily of swampland. Once colonizers settled on the land of the natives with plans of development and enslavement, enslaved Africans were responsible for draining the swamps with their bare hands, literally building the foundation for the city that we now know and love. Other swamps, such as those seen when driving through southeast Louisiana, have been preserved and serve not only as a reminder of our region's beauty, but of our ancestors' strength, resilience, and durability. Maroons are defined as Africans that escaped enslavement. Maroon communities were bands of fugitive slaves that established their own societies and were common along with slave colonies. These communities extended from the Great Dismal Swamp, located near Virginia and North Carolina, the island of Jamaica, to here in Louisiana. The Maroons of Louisiana would run away from their master's plantation to the outskirts of the city and seek refuge in the swamps. It was common for one family member to remain on the plantation, not only as a lookout, but to steal food and weapons and pass it off to the Maroons, often carried on by Big Mama. Maroons would escape far enough to hide, but close enough to where they could return to the plantations to access what they needed. And by the late 1700s, Spain gained control of Louisiana from France, with Esteban Rodriguez Miro as the governor of Louisiana at the time. However, French was still the prominent language of the land, and before Nat Turner's slave rebellion in 1831 and Charles Dessalines' slave revolt in 1811, a Maroon from New Orleans area had every European in the colony shook by his audacity. By the Spaniards, he was known as Juan San Milo, with Milo meaning bad in Spanish. To the French, he was Jean Saint Milo, after the city of Saint Milo, a slave port located in Brittany, France. He lived on the plantation of Pierre Fredericks d'Arensbourg near New Orleans, with little to no documentation about his life as a slave. We do not know his physical appearance or when or how he escaped. What we do know is that after running away, St. Milo emerged as a leader of a group of nearly 50 Maroons, called Cimarroons by the Spanish, that escaped from neighboring plantations. This group consisted of men, nearly half of women, including St. Milo's wife, Cecilia. This high percentage of women was unheard of in other Maroon societies. They occupied the Indian territories and swamps Bas du Fleur, meaning downriver, between the mouth of the Mississippi and New Orleans. More specifically, St. Milo had control of the areas of Chef Mentor, areas surrounding Lake Bourne, the Rigolets, French for gutter, a passage of water connecting larger bodies of water, near Slidell, and parts of the land that we know today as the West Bank. The group's most notable occupy was that of Terre Gaillarde, meaning land full of life in French. This area was defined as the land between Lake Bourne and the Mississippi River. St. Milo baptized Ville Gaillarde himself, declaring, Malheur à blanc qui passerait ces bons. Woe to the white man who had passed this boundary. when striking an axe into a tree. This area, now known as Bayou St. Milo, is credited as the largest Maroon settlement in Louisiana history. And although the Maroons were off the plantations, the conditions of the swamps were not easy. Luckily, they were often met with assistance from the Native Americans, and particularly the Choctaw Indians. When you hear people say, I got Indian in my family, they are probably be telling the truth. This relationship between Africans and Native Americans in Louisiana's Maroon colonies was the origin of what would become New Orleans Mardi Gras Indian traditions, of which myself and Brother Joshua are a part of. The swamps St. Milo and his group inhabited areas consisted of cypress trees, marshes, chest-high muddy waters. Animals range from hogs, birds, frogs, and turtles to alligators and snakes. Maroons often killed wildlife, cultivated crops, and lived off roots and herbs as a means of survival. They would build underground caves in the swamps to avoid capture, with female maroons sometimes giving birth in these caves. St. Milo would often do the lumber and field chores of plantation slaves in exchange for the master's weapons and ammunition. One day, St. Milo and some fellow Maroons ran into an American that demanded to know where they were headed. Words were exchanged. Several other white men arrived, and all of the Maroons except St. Milo were tied up. The men loaded the Maroons into their pirogues, French for boats, and headed towards New Orleans to turn them in. St. Milo untied his companions and struck one of the white men. There was a struggle between the men and the Maroons, and 4 Americans were left dead. St. Milo and the Maroons fled to Chef Mentor, where they hid for several months. With this act of bloodshed, word eventually got back to the authorities of New Orleans about St. Milo and his group of Maroons. Governor Miro feared that this large strategic Maroon colony would spark a rebellion among plantation slaves. So St. Milo had to be stopped. They tried many tactics, having enslaved people pose as Maroons and return with the location of St. Milo's whereabouts, sending free people of color to hunt and kill Maroons in their settlements, and forcing information of plantation slaves that enabled St. Milo and his group. St. Milo learned of these tactics and returned back to Terre Gaillarde to warn the other Maroons. Unfortunately, they were met with the group of free people of color sent by Miro. Several Maroons were killed, some were arrested, but St. Milo was able to swim away. It was decided that 2 of the Maroons were to receive the greatest and more severe punishment in order to set an example. They were charged, sentenced to 300 lashes, and exiled over 900 miles away. However, Spanish authorities wouldn't be satisfied until St. Milo himself was captured. Following the attack at Terre Gaillarde, St. Milo and the remaining Maroons had to find a temporary safe haven. They settled at Detour d'Anglais, French for English Turn, located on the West Bank, on the outskirts of a neighboring plantation. Eventually, they made way back to Terre Gaillarde over in New Orleans. Governor Miro and Spanish authorities were planning a final crackdown on St. Milo and his group. A bounty was put on St. Milo, with freedom offered to any slave who could bring back the leader's head. A plan was devised to send armed men to all of St. Milo's reported areas. St. Milo's journey met its demise near Terre Gaillarde. He was shot in the arm, captured with other Maroons, and brought to New Orleans to face punishment. Some Maroons were hung, Others were branded on the cheek with an M for maroons. Some say they were branded with the fleur-de-lis and were returned back to their owners. The remaining maroons fled to the swamps of Barataria, south of Marrero on New Orleans' West Bank, when they heard of St. Milo's capture. So again, on June 19th, 1784, Maroon leader St. John Milo was hung at Plaza de Armas, now Jackson Square, in the French Quarter. Over 80 years later, in 1865, this date ironically became known as Juneteenth, marking the official end date of slavery after the emancipation of remaining slaves in Texas. And this is why I continue to show honor and reverence on Juneteenth to St. Milo. And one of our ceremonies can be found on my YouTube page. The legacy of John St. Milo is known by few, with his story primarily passed on through oral tradition. There are few resources that document his story. There are no monuments or streets named in his honor. He has never been mentioned in any textbook or history class that I have ever taken. But for those that know, they never forget. Legend has it a statue labeled Saint Maroon, described as a colored saint that white people don't know nothing about, was seen on an altar at the home of Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau. It is said that she deemed this Saint Maroon as the patron saint of runaway slaves. It was this fact, an image of Saint Milo, that it was in its rightful place. It is said that she deemed this Saint Maroon as the patron saint of runaway slaves. If this was in fact an image of Saint Milo, then it was in its rightful place. Slavery was never a choice, nor did our ancestors idly sit by for 400 years without resistance or opposition. St. Milo and the Maroons represent a society outside of slavery. They didn't have time to wait around for an Emancipation Proclamation. They reclaimed their own freedom. They strategically maneuvered throughout Southeast Louisiana, oftentimes on foot. They risked their lives with the extremities of the swamp and the possibility of capture. Their fearlessness, resistance, and solidarity is truly something to glorify. They are heroes and martyrs that should be memorialized through monuments, statues, schools, and street names instead of the ones that initiated, funded, and established their oppression. After deciding to share the story of John St. Milo, this author went on a Honey Island swamp tour to gain a better understanding of the swamps that St. Milo and so many other Maroons inhabited. Honey Island rests near Pearl River, the Wrigley's near Slidell and Lake Bourne, where St. Milo once settled. Through the heat and humidity of the swampland, we were met with buku alligators, snakes, frogs, raccoons. Chewing further into the swamp had the author thinking, my people should have never had to go through this. But at the same time, leaving the tour without a great sense of pride and appreciation that they absolutely did. Some stayed on the plantations, some helped their masters search for the Maroons themselves, some snitched, some weren't made for the journey, some died trying. None of these experiences should be discredited, as they all endured a brutal system that thankfully we never had to. And although literal slavery has been abolished, the system of oppression has changed face and manifests in our laws and institutions rather than chains and whips. Much like Maroons, slaves, and free people of color existing as Black in America is an act of resistance within itself. Juan St. Milo lives on through literature, songs, martyrdom, and through all of us. Let his story serve as a reminder of what we come from and as a reference of how far we still have to go. And we are indeed grateful for those of you who continue to join us here and support us in this weeknight broadcast at 9 p.m. U.S. Central Standard Time in support of New Orleans International Voodoo Day. Thank you so much, Ray Alexander, for joining us, Neophyte Bocour, Nina Lloyd, and let's begin to open the mics of our co-hosts, the beloved Joshua Nylan Tanner, Wild Man of Black Hawk Voodoo, and my first priest, Hoodoo Central, House of the Divine Prince, our beloved elder Reggie, Green Soap, and as well as our beloved Queen Mother, Sister Toni Val Martinez. Please come on in and join the conversation. All is a blessing.
As you was reading all the locations of the land that St. Milo covered as part of the Maroon settlement, I'm familiar. I'm very familiar with those areas as a child growing up there fishing and hunting. And I'm just thinking as I'm seeing it, as you're reading, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of land to cover. That's a lot of waterway. That's a lot to get around in a little Piru boat. A lot of that is you can walk pulling the boat, and then you can swim pulling the boat, and then you got to get in the boat. But they had to be very hardy people, very strong-willed to do all of that. I'm familiar with Honey Island. I always thought they had a Bigfoot in there. I was scared of Honey Island as a child. But they also had a town in that area where the floodgates that they opened up are located, and they flooded it out. They flooded it for the floodgates. A black town. But that just had to be a serious way of life to constantly be in those swamps. And it was because of slaves and slavery and the enslaved that bounties were placed on the heads of the native indigenous Americans, because the slave owners complained to the government that the Indians were stealing all these slaves. So that's when scalping came into being from that. When they would scalp the indigenous people to bring it back to collect the $20 gold piece or $50 gold piece, whatever they was offering, different bounties for different towns. Hello, Elder Reggie, how are you?
Brother Joshua, are we alone?
No, I'm here. I'm here. How you guys doing? I hope you guys having a good night. You're right, Toni. I was just thinking about everything that you were saying. But you're right. Like in terms of the indigenous people here also suffered. I mean, the maroon culture that was here was how can I say, what word am I looking for? Was influenced and educated upon how to live, how to survive by a lot of indigenous people and indigenous people that was here prior to that's the reason why the government would put a bounty on these people, because these people had the knowledge, had the know-how, had to know where to go, how to find, where not to go, what not to do, what to do. So they lived here before, so they had that information and had the intel that they had been fighting against for hundreds of years against, that they came to peace to. But I would say that most people, we have to. I think we have to acknowledge that side of the conversation, along with Saint Milo and his his will and his fortitude to just stand up against everything. He just stand up against it. The oppression that we're standing up against right now. I couldn't help to think about immigration, and just the things that's happening right now with all these camps and stuff that's around the country that is housing these people that they're capturing and putting into these camps to be held, to be sent wherever they're going to be sent. I'm just like, this is the same thing all over again. It's sad to
Yeah,
see.
it's like history repeating itself.
Yeah, it's very sad to see.
And
Yo,
I was
Reggie, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just waiting my turn. But anyway, good night. In blessing, Divine Prince, Sister Toni, Brother Joshua, everyone. Y'all bringing in powerful information. But when Divine Prince was reading, my mind triggered back to the movie Nat Turner that was filmed and directed by Nate Parker, which was located at Fort Pike. Fort Pike, if you travel the route Divine Prince spoke of Chef Pass down to the Wrigley's Lake Bond, and as you're moving out towards Slidell, there's a track of road you can stay on with your vehicle, and then you're going to run into Fort Pike. Fort Pike, the groundwork for Fort Pike was laid while they were still on the hunt for St. Milo. I believe 1793 is when they laid the first foundation for that Fort Pike. The reason I'm bringing that up, even today, if you would take a drive down Chef Pads, and once you get to Fort Pike, it time stamps you almost back to that time frame. That fort is old, it's coming apart. But when you're in that area, you get a feel for sort of what it was like when St. Malo was moving around in that area. And I just wanted to add that to the story.
Yes, and also I was thinking, pirates like the Lafitte brothers
Yeah.
and Dominique Elder Reggie.
Yes.
I did research on him. They had to depend on the Maroons also a lot, because remember, they
Yeah.
was outlaws. They had to get food and supplies. They had to get salted fish and meats to
Yeah.
bring out when they went on the ship. They had to get other foods and other
Medicine.
to bring on their ships also. And they needed leg work on the land because they were hiding a lot of stuff in the swamps. Also, a lot of loot, a lot of whiskey barrels, a lot of plundering that they had did from robbing these ships. And they couldn't go into the port of New Orleans. They was wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you had to
You
think
can't.
now who was helping them when they came up in Whiskey Bay, when they went down and left the big boats and came in the smaller boats into the swamp to get around. They too hid in the swamp, so they had to be very much aware of the maroon settlements, and they didn't tell on them.
Yeah.
They
People
didn't rat them
underestimate.
out.
People underestimate the waterways down here in Louisiana, but it like you can look back in history. The first French explorers that came here, they got diaries of talking about it, saying like if it wasn't for the native people here or the Maroons or the indigenous people that knew the land and where to go and how to do what you had to do, you might end up in a situation where you just can't get out of. Like you just imagine going up a bayou that cuts off, that don't run into any major waterways.
And just imagine going
And you
into
bottom out.
quicksand.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't getting out of there. You can be stuck. Might as well chop up that boat and build a house.
I think a lot of them did that. I know when I was younger, they had a white family we used to go see that lived on a piece of land out in the middle of the swamp that gave me the creeps. But we had to go to them because I don't know how the hierarchy went, but it was they swamp, they area swamp, and we had to let them know that we was in there. in case we didn't come back. They could send somebody to look for us. And my mom and dad used to bring them stuff, lemons and peppermint candy for their little dirty children. And they was. I wasn't prissy by far, but my mama didn't allow me to go around looking like that. And tobacco for the daddy, different little stuff, cloth for the wife to make some more little dresses or whatever for the kids. But one thing too that was awful terrible, oh my God, besides the crocodiles, not crocodiles, the alligators and the cottonmouths, moccasins, the bugs, oh my God, the mosquitoes.
Yeah.
The different bugs that just fly on you and will bite you. You go into a swarm of gnats, that's millions of them, and it's like a block long, and you scared to breathe to open your mouth because they're trying to go in every hole. That was a hard life, y'all. That was hard.
Yes.
We
And
got sermons like that.
you can imagine I'm there in the 1960s and 70s. Imagine the 1860s and 70s when it was more wilderness and more raw and untamed.
Yeah, I like to chime in one more time with Chef Pass. You can take Chef Pass if you don't have a boat, even back in the 1700s. There's a landmass that you can walk from New Orleans out basically to Mobile, Alabama, just by land if you don't have that. But the only way you could do it, it would have to be Chef Pass. And that is of particular importance to even St. Malo, because as Divine Prince began to reading, they moved through Chef Pass by foot. And once they got into the wilderness, maybe they cut some trees, made some canoes and things of that nature, but they first moved and ran by foot. And that tract of land allowed them to distance themselves from the city proper of New Orleans.
Oh, that was a life. What a life. What a life. Well, we coming to the end of the show, and I'd like to turn the mic over to Elder Reggie for him to close out. Oh, I had a question. Did they have the Freedman marker? Did they have that ceremony?
Sister Toni, no, it's been delayed, and once it's officially up and wrapped, I'll put the proper information out so we could do the reveal of the marker, and it's going to be coming up soon. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate you for that. And with that, I'd like to just, lest we forget, spiritual medicine of voodoo brings healing and relief from the shackles of slavery that bind the master and the slave to the same chain of social division. When we make mention of St. Malo, we also make mention of the powers that be that hung him in Jackson Square. So it's a tragic story all the way around. And we would continue to unpack stories like this as we continue to delve into the International Voodoo Day events around the city of New Orleans and Louisiana in particular, Benin and Haiti. With that, I say ashe, ashe, ashe. Thanks, everyone. Good night, good night, good night.
Good night, everyone.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Camille Nylan, the teacher for our 4-week dance class series. Every week, it's on a different beat. You don't need any dance experience. You're just going to have fun and get your groove on. Every Thursday, starting July 10th through July 31st, 6:30 to 7:30 at the New Orleans Healing Center on St. Claude. Come on in, have fun, and get your groove on. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you.
Allow me to show you something.
They say I'm crazy, and that might be true. I got this right in my DNA, yeah, I'm coming for you. It's time we turn the tables, flip these motherfuckers on you. I wanna see you hanging from trees. It's time you pay for your dirt and your showtime. You created the monster, you created the beast. Now all this savagery you just gon' reap. I'm coming home, daddy, to the plantation, and I'm taking the lives of everybody, including the children, on some Nat Turner. Oh, do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. I met my girl Harriet at the gate. If you wanna know how she doing, yeah, she's straight. But she had one question: when we gon' get up? All that talking tough, yeah, we don't walk it tough. She got it locked and loaded, got that piece up on her side. She looked me in my eyes and said, "Meet you ready to ride?" Moving forward, you gotta use both eyes. Watch your front and watch your back. Keep your hands up on your gas. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. He sit at the table, but he don't order no bacon. He greet me in those words, assalamu alaikum. Got them glasses on his face and them waves in his head. He go by the name of Detroit Red. He looks me in my eye and says, "You only get one try. Know that your biggest opposition will come from the inside. I know you wanna love them all, but don't even try, because they'll smile up in your face while plotting your demise." Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down.